From the Swiss Alps to the Canadian Rockies, celebrating unique connections between Switzerland and Canada. Brought to you by the Swiss representations in Canada.
Welcome to the third season of the podcast series From the Alps to the Rockies. My name is Urs Obrist. I'm the Senior Science and Technology Counselor at the Embassy of Switzerland in Canada. It is my pleasure to welcome today the Volunteer Executive Director of GROW, a community food literacy center. Her name is Pamela Farrell. Pamela Farrell was born and raised in Zurich and has been living in Canada since 2001. She now lives in Niagara Falls, where she works as a teacher and has made herself a name as a staunch supporter of food literacy. She has launched a program that assists people in need with access to fresh, healthy, and affordable food. So welcome, Pamela. It is a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Urs. It's my pleasure to be here.
Pam, you have lived in Canada for just about 20 years now. Can you describe what brought you from Switzerland to Canada?
Yes, so it would be my husband. My husband is originally from Toronto, Canada, and he was the reason I moved here. We met in London, England, and then I came to visit Toronto mainly a couple of times and eventually made my home here.
Was there a special draw to Canada? Did you have an image of Canada before coming here for the first time?
I was pretty naive. I did not know much about Canada before I came here. I just knew it was part of North America. I wasn't aware of the vast land and the variety of landscapes here. So I actually came first. My husband now, back then, he invited me to come skiing in Ontario. And as you know, in Ontario, there are no mountains, not like BC. So he coaxed me over here with a promise of great skiing. And we were driving for hours and I asked him, where are the mountains? Where are the mountains? And he said, oh, we're only 10 minutes away. And so we ended up at Blue Mountain, which is not a mountain, but it's a nice ski resort, but not what I had expected to be skiing on. So I did not know much about Canada before coming. I've certainly had the chance over the last 10 years to explore many areas in Canada, from BC to Newfoundland. And it's just, it's a beautiful country.
Were there any challenges in getting settled in Canada?
You know, at first it was hard being away from my family and just some of the cultural differences become very apparent after, you know, that honeymoon period ends of being excited about living in a new country. So it was a little difficult. I had always been passionate about the English language, so I didn't have that barrier at first with the language. But it was hard to live in a big city when you don't really know a lot of people and you're not really familiar with the way things work.
And you went through the normal process of getting permanent residency?
Yes, so I actually first came under the Young Workers Exchange program that Switzerland has with Canada, which I'm not sure if they still offer that, but it's definitely a really great program to experience a new culture, work in a different country, and live just like a Canadian. And so that was the first step for me. And then during that time, my husband and I got engaged, and I applied for permanent residency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the youth mobility program is actually still in place between Switzerland and Canada.
Oh, great. Yeah, I highly recommend
it. Yeah, even all during the COVID times, it was still running. So it's definitely a fantastic program. Now, having lived in Canada and being settled here, where do you see the main differences between the two countries?
Well, besides just the size difference, you know, Canada is a beautiful country with so many different aspects, from natural elements, but also from a cultural diversity perspective, especially when we lived in Toronto. It has a very diverse population, a lot of different ethnic and language groups, which is very different from where I grew up in Switzerland. I would say it has allowed me to kind of pursue things that I don't think I would have pursued in Switzerland. For example, my education, starting this charity. I don't think necessarily I would have done that maybe in Switzerland. From a social program perspective, I think Canada has a lot to learn from Switzerland. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit later too, but the social assistance programs here in Canada are not set up for allowing people to get out of them, but remain in this kind of cycle of poverty. Whereas in Switzerland, it's more of a way to, it's a temporary solution to provide people with tools to get out of poverty, essentially.
And you mentioned the educational program that you pursued both in Switzerland and here in Canada. And just having glanced at your CV, there's definitely a notion that you did not follow a standard academic career. Can you describe your pathway when it comes to education?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Switzerland, I completed the business school, the Kaufmännische Angestellte. It's a 3-year apprenticeship program. And I was never really destined for university based on my grades in high school, and I never really thought about going to university. So for me, I think that passion, that readiness for me to go to higher education only started here when I moved to Canada, and maybe it had to do with my maturity level or with my interest in learning, but I was able to take some courses after I came here, and as part of my role back then working at Ernst & Young Canada in adult education. And this kind of, the more I learned and the more I learned about adult education and the more I learned about myself as a learner, and this just kind of fueled my desire to keep on going. So after completing that, I signed up to complete my Bachelor of Arts through distance education with exams taking place at the University of Toronto. And then from there, just continued on with the Bachelor of Education, which is a teacher certification here in Canada. Continued right on. I didn't take a break, completed my Master's in Education, and then took a break to raise my 2 boys. And in 2018, I started my Doctor of Education at the University of Calgary. So it has not been a straightforward process for me, and it's taken me many years to get where I am. But it just goes to show that there's different ways to go about it. And sometimes I find, especially looking back to my schooling in Switzerland, that it was somewhat restricted, that once you were on a path, it was hard to break away from that path. But it has given me that, I think a really good education that has allowed me then to work here in Canada at that same employer at Ernst & Young. And then from there, so it was a really good stepping stone for me.
Mm-hmm. And your passion for learning, it definitely comes across, probably also led to your current role as the volunteer CEO of a community food literacy center. It's called GROW. Can you describe what GROW is, how it came about, and what your motivations are or were to establish it?
Yeah, so GROW is a community-based organization that aims to provide good food for all. So I've touched upon some of the social inequalities that exist here in Canada and really all around the world, essentially, but that people with low incomes do not have the means to access fresh produce at affordable prices. And so GROW really first and foremost provides a weekly low-cost market to people that are living on low incomes, where you can shop for vegetables, fruit, meats, and dairy items. And then also we try to be, so food literacy, I have to explain food literacy in my sense, and this is the topic that my dissertation is on for my doctoral studies. I'm taking the stance of a critical food literacy approach. So often when people think about food literacy, they think of being able to cook or being able to read a nutrition label. So very basic concepts. From a critical literacy perspective, we also look at some of the contextual influences. So for example, where people live, what kind of access they have, what their income levels are, what other barriers exist within their communities or within society that would prevent them from acting on their food literacies. So many of the people that come to grow know how to cook. They know what's healthy for them. They have rich backgrounds in growing food or preparing food, but they don't have the financial means to afford the foods that they want. So Grow really aims to not only provide access to good food, but change some of those barriers that exist through advocacy, education. We're connecting. We've always connect with our provincial government, with our federal government to make sure that we can push some of those systemic barriers that exist.
So in other words, Grow is more than just a food bank.
Yes, absolutely. So we're not a food bank, because the concept of food banks really is emergency food. So food banks were meant to be just for this, a short time period to access foods. And often you can only go to a food bank maybe once a month or every 2 weeks. So it's not meant to be sustainable. So we provide weekly access, and we provide variety of access, because often food banks are restricted to non-perishables and do not offer a wide variety of culturally appropriate choices. So especially newcomers that are here in Canada and don't have the means to go to a grocery store are very restricted by the selections that food banks offer. So we try to see what's represented in our communities and try to offer those dairy choices, for example, non-dairy products, so lactose-free milk, almond milk, meat alternatives. And specifically for our population that we serve, there's a high, many members are diabetic. So we have to make some choices around those needs as well.
Mm-hmm. You have, when I read up about Grow, I read that the area where Grow is located is a food desert. Now, in a country like Canada, this might be coming somewhat as a surprise to hear this terminology. Can you briefly explain what it actually means? What is a food desert?
Yeah, food deserts are areas within a city that do not have access to an affordable food market. So they're usually located in low socioeconomic neighborhoods. And I think the limitation is, some of the research shows it's about 2 kilometers. So people should be able to walk within a 2-kilometer radius to access an affordable food market. And so, as you said, it's ironic, especially here in the Niagara region, which is very well known for tender fruit production, that we have pockets here that do not have an affordable grocery market. And the other ironic thing is that within the neighborhood where Grow is located, we have a beer store and we have a liquor store. And as you know, in Ontario, the liquor stores are government run. And it's interesting that the government provides access to liquor, but obviously is not in the business of providing fresh produce. We also have 3 cannabis dispensaries. That was before it became, really widespread, but when they were government granted. So it's a real paradox.
Mm-hmm. You have mentioned the involvement of government. Do you actually receive subsidies from federal or provincial governments for your project?
No, so at this time we don't receive any government funding. Most of our support comes from community organizations. We have many community partners that help us, and private donors as well.
Mm-hmm. Is there an idea that this could reach, let's say, your municipal government and have them support your idea, or the conversations in that regard, or is that not so much of an idea?
No, absolutely. And we've met with the mayor of the city of Niagara Falls a couple of times, and there's no direct funding from the city, because they are not, they're pushing the responsibility onto the region. We have not been successful with any regional grants, but we did receive some funding through the a special fundraiser that the city does in conjunction with Tourism Niagara. So we were successful with some support there. We did in the past, in the first round of COVID relief from the government, we did receive some funding from the government of Canada last year.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that the food insecurity has been increased in the context of COVID?
Yes, absolutely it has, especially with Niagara Falls being, a huge tourist destination. Majority of employees are within that sector. So when everything shut down, and no one was able to work. So we did see many people reach out from that area where they just lost their job, and there was a lot of uncertainty as to what was happening. And it definitely has increased.
And the customer base that you have, how large is it? And do they visit both you and food banks, or is there some limitations to who can come and see you?
We currently serve about 500 people. So another thing I wanted to mention was that according to research out of actually University of Toronto was that there's only about 25% of food insecure people will access food banks. So that's another reason why GROW was established, to kind of fill that gap. There's a lot of stigma attached to going to food banks. So we were trying to make a center where, that some of that stigma could be removed. And it also, what we've heard from our members, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at our video, but members are provided with a sense of dignity when they pay for the groceries, when they have that choice to buy whatever they want, if it's 1 carrot or 10 carrots. So I think that's a really big aspect of our model, is that there's a sense of dignity, there's a sense of ownership. That's why we don't call our members clients, we call them members, because it's a community-based organization. And so absolutely, they can still go to the food bank. There's no restriction in that sense. And again, we're 2 different programs: emergency support and something that is a little bit more sustainable and a little bit more comprehensive.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you see yourself as an addition to other programs like, those shared food tables where organizations collect food from restaurants and then distribute it into community centers as well? How does that pair up with these kinds of organizations? Do they exist around Niagara Falls, or is that not even in existence there?
Yeah, we have numerous food programs here in the region, from church-based programs that offer emergency food programming, to a soup kitchen that actually operates not too far from us. There's definitely a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are many programs available, and depending where you live, you might have easier access to them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the access in and of itself is a challenge, right? That's what you perceive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So especially also getting to a food bank, there's, usually there's 1 food bank per municipality, because that's how they're funded through the government. So it's difficult, especially if you don't have access to a car. It's hard to get around. And that's another thing that's, I always think back fondly of Switzerland, is the amazing public transport system, and everything's connected with buses and trains and boats. And it's really different here, especially in the Niagara region, where it takes a really long time to get from one place to another if you don't have access to a car.
Mm-hmm. And the fixed store or grocery store concept, that's something that was kind of overcome in Switzerland with a different model, right? Like in the old days.
What do you mean?
Like the micro store that drove around towns.
Yes, the Microbus. Yeah, that's something I don't know. There's a memory that stuck with me of the Microbus coming to our neighborhood, and all the moms and kids waiting and lining up and then cashing out with the bus driver. I thought, looking back now, I thought that's a really, really neat concept of bringing fresh food to communities that don't have access to a regular fixed store. So that's something
would that be a model for Canada?
Well, I think it would make sense. Especially, we have we've received so many calls from other areas in the city who said, oh, this would be great in our neighborhood. This would be really great here or there. And instead of having a fixed store, it would make more sense to drive a bus, just the way the Microbus was set up, where you have, you know, everything. It's not just limited to, I mean, there's mobile markets, but it's limited to produce, and it's limited to, you know, the summer months. And then once winter hits, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. So a Microbus would be one of my personal dreams, to be able to have a Microbus here and support other communities within the region.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of other communities, do you think your setup could be transferred to other areas in Canada? From what I understand, there's obviously a lot of personal investment. You mentioned your own kind of drive coming out of your studies in food literacy and the background or the aspects that kind of formed your educational interests that you now can confer into your work for this organization. So given that, do you think your project can be transferred to other areas of Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. One of the other aspects that prompted me to start GROW was when I came across Community Food Centers Canada, which is a national organization. And that really opened my eyes to different ways of food charity. So providing this kind of more dignified access to food for people who are on low income. So these centers exist all across Canada already. We've just taken it a little bit further by offering, meats and dairy, and also the food literacy aspect, and providing people with a voice in their community as to what they would like to see. So through advocacy and education. So absolutely, it's possible. I mean, it doesn't have to be to this extent, but even a small market, I think, would make a big difference in any community.
Mm-hmm. If people are following this podcast would be interested to hear more about your project or would like to get involved, where could they look up the information?
Yeah, all of our information can be found on our website, which is growcflc.com. So CFLC stands for Community Food Literacy Center. And you can contact us through that website as well.
Great. Well, Pam, it has been a great pleasure to talk to you. I wish your project future success. Obviously, your studies, a final successful dissertation conclusion as well, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Urs. It was absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you.